Years ago, when I told my dad I wanted to go to law school, his response was, "Well, Matt, lawyers are a dime a dozen." Okay, thanks, Dad. But what he meant by that is like, there's a lawyer on every street corner. The problem is, not all lawyers are created equal. There are specialists. You have your divorce lawyers, your criminal defense lawyers, your prosecutors, your real estate attorneys. And sure enough, you have gym lawyers and M&A or mergers and acquisition attorneys, along with a lot of other types. The point that I'm making is whenever you go to buy a gym, or even whenever you go to sell your gym, you want to make sure that the attorney that you hire, because you do need legal representation to do this, the attorney that you hire actually understands the process that you're going through. Hopefully, the attorney that you hire actually has industry-specific knowledge in the fitness industry to understand the ins and outs of buying and selling gyms. Because we recently assisted a gym owner in selling a gym, and this happens more often than not, surprisingly. And whenever we sell a gym, the buyer is technically the one that should be drafting the legal documentation to present to us as the sellers to look at, to review, to redline, to explain to the seller exactly what it is that they're signing. And then ultimately we come to the table and we've whittled down whatever the purchase agreement is, the bill of sale and the assignments and everything else to the point that both parties are comfortable signing them, and then we close. The problem that we see, though, is that these buyers are going out and they're hiring attorneys that don't have any prior knowledge in the fitness industry. They don't have any experience helping somebody buy a gym. And so, quite frankly, they don't really know what they're doing. And this is leaving the buyer exposed to problems that can come up after closing. And that's assuming we get to closing and the attorney doesn't end up somehow messing up the purchase by not understanding what the buyer should be doing. And so in this particular instance, we start off the selling process, and the seller and the buyer are having conversations, and everything seems to be going okay. Not a terribly complicated sale, not a lot of debt on the company that we have to worry about or anything like that. They're just selling the equipment, they're selling the memberships, and they're selling the branded name. It's known as an asset sale. So the buyer wasn't buying the LLC that was selling, they were just buying the assets. So the buyer goes out and they hire an attorney who was not a gym specific or mergers and acquisition specific attorney. My recollection is they were something like an estate attorney, or they were just sort of the family attorney. And we waited and we waited and we waited until we got the purchase paperwork from the buyer's attorney. They have the attorney, they're supposed to present the paperwork, and despite the seller kind of pushing us to say, hey, can we get the paperwork? Can you just produce the paperwork? We gave the buyer's attorney some patience and time to get us the purchase paperwork. So we get the purchase paperwork, and sure enough, it was the wrong kind of purchase. So again, it should have been an asset sale, but we get presented with purchase paperwork for a stock sale. So this created an uncomfortable conversation that I had to call the attorney and say, I'm sorry, you have the wrong kind of purchase paperwork. And unfortunately, they didn't really know what I meant. And so I had to explain to them, we're doing an asset sale, not a stock sale. You need to be presenting us with an asset purchase agreement, not a stock purchase agreement. So the attorney goes back to the drawing board and ends up sending us over additional documentation or revised documentation. When we looked at it, it was kind of like one step above a generalized template that, I don't know, maybe the attorney found somewhere online or had sitting in a form book or something. And it really didn't protect either the buyer or the seller. So we ended up having to step in. And we produced the purchase paperwork to send back over to the buyer's attorney to review. They reviewed it and didn't really provide a lot of changes to it. And so we ultimately signed it and we closed the deal. Post-closing, a couple of issues came up, as they typically do whenever we sell a gym, like some coaches left, some of the memberships quit. This is just attrition that we expect whenever we sell a gym, because gym owners are typically within the gym and the community likes that gym owner. And then when somebody else comes in as the new gym owner, they may not want to stick around anymore. The problem was that the buyer and the buyer's attorney did nothing in the purchase paperwork to protect against this happening, because the buyer's attorney didn't know that they had to protect against this because they don't have any state or industry specific knowledge. And so then the buyer started to create some issues for the seller, because the buyer believed that it was the seller's fault that these people left. But the buyer believed that the seller should have been covering certain costs post-closing. But this was nowhere in the purchase paperwork because they never asked to have it put into the purchase paperwork. So had the buyer gone out and found an industry-specific attorney who knew what they were doing in buying and selling gyms, this would have resulted much differently. The process would have been faster, it would have been cleaner, and the buyer would have had much more protection post-closing against the natural attrition that we expect whenever we sell a gym. So again, there are tons of attorneys in this world. There are some great ones. There are some pretty good ones. There are great divorce attorneys, great real estate attorneys, great estate attorneys. There are great criminal defense attorneys. But you need to make sure that you're hiring an attorney that's familiar with what you're trying to do in the area of law that impacts your buying of a gym. So do your homework, look around, talk with the attorneys, and find somebody who understands the industry so that you don't end up with unnecessary problems after you've just shelled out a whole bunch of money and bought a gym.